The distress signal. Danny Hayes leaned forward in the captain's chair, eyes fixed on the flashing red signal on the console. The Wayfinder had been coasting along the trade lanes, running low on fuel and even lower on paying jobs, when the distress call had come through. Automated message, Sienna muttered, fingers flying across the console as she decrypted the scrambled audio. It's from a Zalari research station. Something about a containment breach. Danny frowned. Any survivors? Sienna shook her head. No direct response. Just a looping signal. Could be a trap. Jax rumbled from his seat, absently tapping his cybernetic fingers against his thigh. The former Marine rarely trusted anything that looked too convenient. Rilo, their alien navigator, let out a low whistle. Zalari don't ask for help lightly. If they abandoned one of their own stations, whatever went wrong must be bad. His deep violet eyes flickered to Danny. Are we going in? Danny exhaled, weighing the risks. The Wayfinder wasn't a warship, but they'd faced danger before. Zalari stations were known for their cutting-edge tech. If they salvaged anything valuable, it could keep them flying for months. She made her decision. Gear up. We're boarding. The Wayfinder docked against the airlock of Station Perseus 9, its exterior eerily silent. The emergency lights bathed the corridors in a dim red glow. As the crew stepped inside, weapons at the ready, the stale air carried a metallic tang, blood. Jax knelt by the first sign of struggle. A set of deep claw marks raked across the corridor walls. He exchanged a look with Danny. Not standard lab accidents. They moved deeper, stepping carefully over scattered data pads and overturned furniture. Danny's heart pounded as they entered the main research wing. The room had been hastily barricaded, tables stacked against the doors, as if the researchers had tried to keep something out. Or in. Sienna hacked into a nearby console, frowning as she pulled up security footage. The grainy screen flickered to life. Scientists ran through the corridors, their faces twisted in terror. Something moved in the shadows behind them, a shifting, inky shape that darted too fast for the cameras to track. Then static. Playback corrupted, Sienna muttered. Rilo adjusted his plasma rifle. I don't like this. A wet coughing sound broke the silence. The crew spun toward the sound. A lone Zalari scientist lay, slumped against the wall, barely clinging to life. His 4 arms trembled as he reached toward them, his usually golden skin turned an unhealthy gray. Danny knelt beside him. What happened here? The Zalari's mandibles twitched, his breathing ragged. They escaped, he rasped. We tried to contain them, but they learn. His gaze locked onto Danny's, something desperate in his alien eyes. You have to stop them. Before she could ask more, he convulsed and went still. Danny slowly stood. Jax exhaled sharply. That's never a good last sentence. Sienna's fingers danced across the console again, her face paling. Danny, this wasn't just a research station. It was a black site. Danny clenched her jaw. The Zalari were notorious for bioexperiments that pushed ethical boundaries. But black site research meant they were working on something so dangerous, even their own government wouldn't claim responsibility. Jax tapped a flickering holo display showing a security clearance code. Project Nix, he read aloud. No details, just redacted files. Danny's gut twisted. They were making something, and it got loose. A sudden clang echoed through the corridors. The crew froze. Did you hear that? Rilo whispered. Another noise. Closer. A skittering sound, like something crawling along the ceiling. Danny flicked her rifle's safety off. We're not alone. Jax moved toward the doorway, but the emergency lights flickered violently, plunging the corridor into near darkness. And then, from the shadows, something moved. A shape unfolded itself from the ceiling, dropping in a boneless, fluid motion. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its skin shifting, features distorting like liquid metal. For a moment, it mimicked Danny's own face, a grotesque echo of her features. Then its mouth opened, far too wide, revealing rows of glistening teeth. Open fire. Blaster bolts lit up the corridor as the crew unleashed hell. The creature moved impossibly fast, dodging and twisting between the shots. Jax caught it with a plasma round the chest. It shrieked, the mimicry flickering like static before it collapsed into a writhing, melting heap. Danny's breath came hard and fast. Sienna, get those logs. Now. Sienna worked faster. Almost got it. A new alert blared across the screen. Security lock compromised. External vessel docking detected. Danny's stomach dropped. Someone else was here. And they weren't alone. The truth in the shadows. The emergency klaxon blared through Station Perseus 9, its warbling tone distorted by the station's failing systems. Danny barely heard it over the pounding of her own heartbeat. "We've got company," she muttered, gripping her rifle as she scanned the corridor. "Sienna, tell me you pulled those logs." Sienna's fingers flew over her wrist tablet, eyes locked on the decrypted files. "Got them, but you're not going to like what I found. Try me." Sienna hesitated, then turned the screen so they could see. Project Nyx wasn't just a standard Zalari experiment. It was a bioweapon program, a genetic experiment designed to create the perfect infiltrators. Creatures engineered to mimic other life forms down to their memories, voices, and mannerisms. Jax let out a low whistle. "So, they're not just shapeshifters. They steal identities." Danny's jaw tightened. "And we just killed one." Rilo's voice was calm, but his hands flexed around his rifle. "If it learned anything from us before it died, that means—" Danny's mind raced. "It means they're adapting. And fast." Another metallic clunk echoed down the corridor. Then another. Footsteps, deliberate and heavy. Jax backed toward the nearest door and checked his rifle. Whoever just docked isn't here for a rescue. Danny gave a sharp nod. "Move. Now." They slipped into a secured research lab, locking the heavy blast door behind them. The room was cluttered with overturned equipment, broken data pads, and shattered glass. A massive containment tank stood in the center, its reinforced glass cracked from the inside. Whatever had been in there wasn't anymore. Danny signaled for Sienna to keep working on the data while the others secure the room. "Who docked with us?" Sienna hacked into the station's external scanners. Her face paled. "Zalari strike team. Heavy weapons, full containment gear. They're not here to help." Danny cursed under her breath. "Figures. They want to wipe this place clean." Rilo adjusted his plasma rifle. "Can we use that against them?" Sienna smirked. "Already on it." She tapped a few commands, and the station's internal sensors flickered online, revealing the strike team's movements. 5 heavily armed Zalari mercs were sweeping the corridors, moving with lethal precision. Jax scowled. "They don't want survivors." Danny considered their options. They couldn't fight them head-on, not with this kind of firepower. And even if they did, there was still the bigger threat. The Nyx creatures were still out there. Then, the overhead lights flickered again. Rilo tensed. "That's not just the station failing, is it?" A low, wet chittering crawled through the room, like a dozen voices whispering at once. Danny snapped her rifle up, scanning the shadows. "They're here." The attack came fast. A blur of shifting flesh lunged from the ceiling, striking at Jax. He barely rolled aside, plasma bolts burning through the air where he'd been standing. Danny fired, her shots tearing into the creature's body. But instead of dying, it split, one half reforming into a second entity. "Shit!" Jax shouted, unloading his rifle. "They can divide!" Sienna scrambled back, nearly knocking over a console. That was not in the research logs. Rilo fired a concussive blast, sending one of the creatures crashing against the far wall. The second lunged for Danny, its face shifting through grotesque, half-formed copies of human features. It reached for her with clawed fingers, her own fingers a twisted mimicry of her hands. Danny didn't hesitate. She grabbed a shot grenade from her belt and slammed it into the thing's chest. The explosion ripped through the lab, sending the creatures screeching and convulsing as electricity arced over their bodies. Smoke filled the air. The creatures twitched, then fell still. Jax coughed. "We should really stop fighting things that can learn." Danny wasn't listening. She turned to Sienna. "We need a way to wipe these things out. Now." Sienna's hands flew across the console, scanning through the recovered data. Then she stopped, eyes going wide. "They're not just learning," she said, voice tight with fear. "They're networked. Danny's stomach dropped. Explain. Sienna tapped the screen. Every time one of them consumes someone, their memories get uploaded to the others. They're all connected like a hive mind. Jax clenched his jaw. So, if even one gets off this station, they all learn everything. The room fell silent. Then a voice crackled over the station speakers. A deep, distorted voice that wasn't human, wasn't alien, was something else entirely. We see you. Danny's blood ran cold. The speakers screeched with feedback, and the station's emergency systems suddenly reactivated on their own. Doors unlocking, red lights flaring brighter, life support stabilizing. Then a new security alert scrolled across the screen. Containment override detected. External vessel compromised. Danny turned to Sienna. Tell me that's a glitch. Sienna's voice was barely a whisper. It's not. The strike team's ship. It's been infiltrated. Danny's breath caught in her throat. The Knicks weren't trying to escape through us. They were using the Zalari strike team's ship. And if that ship left the station, it would be too late to stop them. A greater conspiracy. Danny's fingers clenched around her rifle. The flashing security alert burned on the screen. Containment override detected. External vessel compromised. The Knicks weren't just trying to kill them. They were leaving. If even one got off this station, it could spread across the entire galaxy. Jax exhaled sharply. We need to stop that ship. Danny turned to Sienna. Can you override their launch sequence? Sienna's fingers danced across the console, but her face twisted in frustration. The Zalari strike team locked down their systems with military-grade encryption. I need direct access to their ship's mainframe. Then we don't have time to sit here, Danny said. We move. The team pushed through the darkened corridors, weapons at the ready. The station was no longer just quiet. It was wrong. The emergency lights flickered erratically. The air seemed thicker, and every shadow felt like it was watching them. Danny's gut told her they weren't alone. They weren't. As they reached the docking bay, a figure stepped into their path. It wore Zalari combat armor, but its movements were too smooth, too fluid. The moment it tilted its head in an unnatural way, Danny knew. It wasn't Zalari anymore. The mimic's voice was disturbingly calm. Humans, always so persistent. Danny raised her rifle. We're shutting you down, one way or another. The mimic smiled. Its face rippled, shifting, reforming into an approximation of Danny's own features. A grotesque reflection of her. Jax fired first. Plasma rounds tore through the mimic's chest, but it barely flinched. The wounds closed instantly, the flesh knitting itself back together like liquid metal. Then it moved, faster than anything organic should. It slammed into Jax, sending him sprawling against the wall. His cybernetic arm sparked as he hit the metal floor. Mako lunged in next, blades flashing, but the mimic caught his wrist mid-strike. For a split second, its hand became his hand, its face flickering into his face. Danny didn't hesitate. She grabbed a shock grenade from her belt, thumbed the activation switch, and shoved it straight into the mimic's torso. The explosion of electricity ripped through it. The mimic convulsed violently, its body glitching, shifting through different faces and forms before it finally collapsed, twitching. Jax groaned, pushing himself up. I officially hate these things. Danny pulled him to his feet. We're not done yet. They reached the docking bay, just as the Zalari strike team arrived from the opposite corridor. 5 of them, armed to the teeth. Led by Commander Varen. Danny had seen his type before. Ruthless, efficient, willing to kill anything that got in his way. His visor reflected the emergency lights as he aimed his weapon at her. You shouldn't be here, human. His voice was cold. This operation is classified. Danny didn't lower her rifle. Your ship's been compromised. Varen didn't flinch. We have it under control. You have nothing under control. Sienna stepped forward, holding up her tablet. I've seen the logs. You weren't here to destroy the Knicks. She turned the screen, revealing classified files she decrypted. You were here to capture them. Silence. Then, slowly, Varen lowered his weapon. Danny's stomach twisted. He's not denying it. You're making a mistake, Varen said. These creatures are valuable. More than you understand. Jack scoffed. Oh, we understand just fine. Danny's grip tightened. They're networked. If even one escapes, it learns everything. It could infiltrate entire civilizations. And you want to take them. Varen's expression was unreadable behind his helmet. This is bigger than you, Captain. Danny took a step forward. No, this is bigger than your corporate overlords. You can't control these things. Varen's fingers hovered over his rifle. Stand down. Danny's response was simple. She shot him in the leg. Varen collapsed to one knee with a snarl of pain, his team reacting too slowly. Jax, blow the docking clamps, Danny ordered. Jax grinned. With pleasure, he pulled a det pack from his belt and hurled it toward the Zalari ship's docking clamps. The explosion rocked the station, sending a shockwave through the bay. The ship lurched sideways, cables snapping, emergency alarms blaring. Varen's eyes burned with rage. You idiot. Danny grabbed him by the collar and pulled him close. Better for the galaxy if this station burns than if one of those things gets loose. A sudden inhuman screech made them all turn. At the far end of the bay, the Nyx Alpha stood in the doorway. Taller than any human, its form constantly shifting, limbs lengthening, twisting, reforming. Its face was a shattered mosaic of half-formed features, as if it were still choosing which one to keep. And it spoke. You cannot stop what has begun. Then it lunged. The last thing Danny saw before she fired was its face changing. Not into hers, not into one of the Zalari, but into someone she had never seen before. No one leaves. Danny fired first. The shot tore through the Nyx Alpha's shifting flesh, but it barely staggered. Its body absorbed the impact, skin rippling like liquid metal before reforming. The mimicry on its face twisted, dozens of expressions flickering in rapid succession. Then it lunged. Jax tackled Danny aside as razor-sharp claws slashed through the air where she'd been standing. The Alpha was faster than the others, more refined, more lethal. Danny hit the ground, rolling to her feet just as Sienna fired a concussive blast. The impact sent the Alpha skidding back but didn't fall. It twisted unnaturally, planting a hand on the floor and rebalancing mid-motion. Jax cursed. This one's different. No kidding, Danny muttered, leveling her rifle again. We need to cut it off from the others. Rilo, breathing hard, checked his scanner. I think I already did that. Danny blinked. What do you mean? Rilo hesitated, eyes scanning the readings. The others were networked connected. This one's not. It's running solo. That made Danny's blood run cold. If it was working alone, that meant it had already surpassed the others. It didn't need a hive mind anymore. It had evolved, and it was still evolving. The Alpha straightened, tilting its head. It spoke again. This time, its voice was layered, fractured, as if 1,000 voices were trying to escape at once. You are not the first to stand against me. Danny set her jaw. Yeah? Bet will be the last. The Alpha moved. It was on them in seconds, a blur of shifting limbs and liquid muscle. Danny barely had time to react before it slammed into her, sending her crashing into a wall. Pain exploded through her ribs, but she gritted her teeth and kept her grip on her rifle. Jax and Rilo opened fire, plasma bolts ripping through the creature's form. For the first time, it screamed, not in pain, in frustration. It had never been hurt like this before. That was all the confirmation Danny needed. It could be killed. The docking bay's control panel. Sienna's hands were a blur as she worked. The station's systems were failing, alarms blaring across every deck. She only had one shot at this. The Zalari strike ship was crippled, but the station's self-destruct was still locked behind multiple clearance codes. Sienna overrode them one by one. Her screen flashed red. Warning, core meltdown initiated. T-minus 5 minutes until detonation. She took a shaky breath. No turning back now. Danny saw the countdown begin on her wrist display. 5 minutes. The Alpha must have seen it too, because its form shuddered, rippling with something new. Danny's stomach clenched as she realized what was happening. It was afraid. For the first time, the Nyx Alpha was afraid. It wasn't invincible. It could die, and it was trying to decide whether to run. Danny didn't give the chance. She sprinted forward, dodging its wild counterattack, and plunged her last shock grenade directly into its shifting chest. Jax now, Jax's cybernetic arm snapped up, launching a concussive det pack straight into the creature's exposed core. Danny dove away as Jax detonated it. The explosion ripped through the Alpha's body. It screamed, its entire form glitching, struggling to hold itself together. Its limbs melted, then reformed. Its face flickered through 100 different identities, desperate to stabilize. But it couldn't. Danny watched as its body began breaking down. The network that had once made it powerful was now a weakness. It was trying to evolve, but it had nowhere left to go. It collapsed, twitching violently as its body gave up. Danny exhaled. It was over. The station's destruction countdown reached 2 minutes as the crew sprinted back toward the Wayfinder. Varen, the wounded Zalari commander, limped behind them. "You idiots, you just destroyed priceless research." Danny grabbed him by the collar as they ran. "Shut up and get to the ship." The Wayfinder's engines were already roaring to life as they reached the docking ramp. Sienna dove into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. "Hang on." The station behind them shuddered violently, the core meltdown reaching critical. Danny barely had time to strap in before the Wayfinder blasted out of the docking bay, engines burning hot. Through the viewport, Station Perseus 9 erupted. The explosion swallowed it whole, fire and debris scattering into the void. Danny let out a slow breath. It was done. The Knicks were gone. At least she hoped so. Epilogue. Danny sat in the Wayfinder's cockpit, staring at the stars. Sienna walked up beside her, arms crossed. "You think it's really over?" Danny exhaled. "I don't know." Jax, leaning against the bulkhead, grunted. "It better be. Otherwise, we're all screwed." Rilo spoke quietly. "It learned fast. Too fast." Danny nodded slowly. That was what haunted her. The Alpha had been evolving up until the very end. What if it had learned something new? What if it hadn't died? She shook the thought away. For now, they had survived. And if the Knicks ever returned, they'd be ready.